Hey everyone, and welcome back to another battle report with Gaming in the Keats. I am your host, Shate001, and it's going to be Daemon Legions versus yet again Vampire Covenant. So I feel like of all the armies that I play against, Vampire Covenant is just the one that keeps coming up over and over and over again. So you'd think I'd be like pretty decent at uh knowing how to beat the Vampire Covenant, but I've found that I tend to struggle a lot, um, particularly with trying to prioritize which spells to dispel, like the heals versus the snipes versus the movement shenanigans, and it's like really challenging. And then the zombie dragon has always been a model for me. Now that it's made its popularity known, that I've been seeking to try and kill for several different editions here, and have actually yet to kill one of these. So let's see if today is going to be that day. On to my list. If you've seen my previous videos, then it hasn't changed. I've kept now the same list for 3 matches. However, I will probably change it up again for my final 2 just to revisit some old units that I want to try out one more time. I'm really liking the Hoarders. The Hoarders have been holding it down. And I mean, the double Wizard Master with Divination and Evocation is just so potent for the range damage potential, combined with the potential for using Spear of Infinities here. I'm also liking the bloatflies. Digestive Vomit is not my first pick on them, but it's cheaper, so it fit in the list, and it's been coming in really nicely as well. Yeah, the bloatflies, the hoarders have just been really solid units, and myrmidons tend to die, but they tend to take things with them, which I appreciate. However, they're just like giving up their points at the moment. So I'm either playing them wrong or, they're the thing that people tend to deal with the easiest. But it makes sense. And I think the Miser of Sugalug really catches people off guard when they find out he's Resilient 7, and then because I have 3 Veiled tokens saved, their AP3 goes to AP0, which is just, it's such a good rule on a Resilient 7 model with a 4-up armor, 5-up Aegis, and then combine that with Segmented Shell, you're minusing 1 damage from any like multi-wound to a minimum of 1 is just, this dude is a tank. So that's enough on my list though. On to my opponent's vampire list. This is, I think, the epitome of an MSU vampire list. Everything is super cheap. Nothing over 300 points except for ghouls, and except for the 2 super characters. So just like my list in terms of like having 2 super characters. So he's got this really expensive zombie dragon as his general, who's a monster hunter. So he's doing multiple wounds 2 against anything with towering, and then you have and divine attacks. So ugh, and then the other guy, of course, has divine attacks as well. Uh, with the halberd on cleansing light, and because it's Strigoi, he gets hatred and he's shamanism, so he has the 5-up fortitude on the shrieking horror on top of, being wounded on 5s if he gets the shamanism spelled off at best. Like both these characters are tough. Oh, and then don't forget the shrieking horror is, magic resistance too, so that just makes it that much more difficult to deal with. But his core is basically chaff slash just scoring, and then everything else is just, all these like 5 units of gas. So it's like 9 times 5. What was that? 45 wounds of resilience 5 with a fortitude save. That's really annoying, and they're not scoring, so you can throw them away if you need to. So for his scoring, he's just got the 3 in core, and then the Bear Knights, and then 2 units of Vampire Knights. So yeah, this is going to be an interesting matchup for sure. So with the pregame setup, we got marching columns on map A7. And then it's going to be hold the ground. So we're just going to have this big scrum in the center, and already I'm at a disadvantage with this secondary. On to magic. I've chosen Whispers of the Veil, Hasten the Hour, Spectral Blades, and Touch of the Reaper, so pretty standard setup for the Miser. On Evocation, and then for Div, I took Fate's Judgment, Stars Align, Unerring Strike, and then I want to try out Mirrors of the Veil again. I've found it in a previous match against vampires to actually be pretty effective, because it's a universal spell, and you're basically making the unit MR3, and so if a heal, for example, targets that unit, it's a -3 to it's MR3. So it makes for an interesting moment there, or interesting decision for my opponent having to make, and potentially mitigate some of the heals that come in. But we'll see if it gets used. And then for my opponent, the zombie dragon has double the hereditary spells plus the Dead Arise, because he's Nosferatu vampire and has the necromantic staff, and then he also has pentagram of pain for an extra heal, and he took Rot Within. I noticed people with occultism are taking Rot Within against me, which I'm like pretty okay with. I know it's like one of those cheap spells, and it's a permanent spell, and can it's like it can slightly tip a combat, but I feel like I have enough magic to counterbalance that deficit that Rot Within can sometimes bring. And then of course on Shamanism, he's got the Awaken the Beasts there. My pregame thoughts. On the macro level, I know it's going to be really difficult for me to score the secondary objective, because my opponent just has so much more, not only scoring units, but the units of ghasts just are really annoying roadblocks, and I think my opponent will be able to control the center much better than I can. I still have 3 really tough scoring units that can hopefully get through to the center, but I have the fear of potentially just being enveloped with all the units, because if you have those multiple units of ghasts charging you at once, that's just a lot of wounds to get through, that I think I ultimately lose that grind. So my plan instead is to just go first and take board control, and start trying to get rid of his chaff pieces with damage spells, and then then have the dragons, or the dragon and the Shrieking Horror, come into my range, and then hopefully I can target one of them, primarily the Shrieking Horror, because that's the one that I'm afraid of the most, with the auto hits that are AP 10 wounding on my leadership. And both those units have divine attacks, and I don't have Brimstone Secretions, which is making me think, okay, for my next several lists, I just want to take Brimstone Secretions. If I'm running 2 big Greater Demon Wizard Masters, it just kind of makes sense, because divine is, with Cleansing Fire just so cheap as it is, it just kind of makes sense to have it. But for now, I don't have it. It's basically this matchup is really dependent upon whether or not my range damage can take out one or both of those characters. Otherwise, I think it's going to be an uphill battle for me. I'm hoping, depending on how my opponent plays his ghasts, I'm hoping to utilize the Furies to basically chaff like multiple units at once. And I want to keep the courtesan and miser relatively together so I can have that extended divination range. And I just need to be also careful to not let one of the big greater demons get caught on a unit of ghasts or skeletons and then get countercharged by one of the dragons or one of the super characters. Because that, I think, then that just wrecks me. So I'm calling this matchup unstable to an orange because I'm probably going to lose that center objective. And so I really just need to focus on those two, the zombie dragon and the shrieking horror. So because it's marching columns, I rolled, let's see, I think my opponent won and made me choose, I think I got to deploy first then. So I deployed the bloatflies first. My opponent then deployed their ghasts. I deployed myrmidons. Then it went to dogs, and then I deployed my furies. So then my opponent deployed another unit of ghasts, and from there I decided, okay, so I'm just going to drop and play really compact in the center. So I have now my 2 units of myrmidons, 2 units of furies behind them, the hoarders off to the right side to be hoarders, and they can handle their strider, so they don't have to worry about the ruins coming in, and then this is admittedly a bit of a bluff. I do apologize again for this unpainted, or at least the unpainted model of the courtesan. At some point I'll get to it, I promise. But yeah, so we have the miser in the center here, and the courtesan off to the left side. However, this for me is actually a ploy, if you will. So my plan is to actually sweep her around on this side, because I have a feeling my opponent is then want to deploy his 2 units of knights against the hoarders because they're AP 0, and sure enough, that's exactly what happened. So you have all these units of ghasts in the center. You have the zombie dragon in the back, another unit of dire wolves that's already vanguarded. These 2 have already vanguarded. 2 units of skeletons with the relentless company, bat swarms, the shrieking horror, barrow knights right here, and then the 2 units of vampire knights coming around my right side. So my goal here is to just swing the courtesan around this way, and so then that can hopefully start to put pressure on the shrieking horror, but not let the shrieking horror just come over to me as well. It's like this weird cat and mouse game, because the shrieking horror can then just come up in one turn and just scream at you. So I have to be very careful about that. I have to be mindful of it, but at the same time, I need to be putting pressure on it with the range damage. So that's the idea. And then, you can see we got impassable, forest, hill, fence, field, ruins, another impassable, and a water feature. So my turn 1, I enact the ploy. I swing the courtesan around this side. She can there is even enough space to have her charge through this gap in case something comes to the center. I push everything sort of in this bit of a battle line here. The bloatflies peek their nose up on the hill, so they're giving this ghast unit a 9. And the dogs, of course, can charge in if they want, still front. I think this ghast unit probably needs either a 12 or it's too far. And I'm not giving my opponent any other charges, so I'm not quite within 6 inches of the objective yet. I'm just making sure that I'm just taking some space and seeing where his chaff goes. And then I'm swinging my furies out to this side to try and intercept these knights coming around. And the knights at this point cannot march out of my line of sight of the hoarders, or at least I believe I checked that so that wasn't a possibility. And this unit of furies is just going to have to come and intercept all these ghasts. And something to note, the courtesan is also just within 21 inches of these dire wolves because of the divination I guess, attribute or special ability. So the miser's within 18, so I can get hasten, and then I can also get the 21 inches. And so my focus right now, because my opponent deployed both his super characters in the back, is just to get rid of this unit of dogs. And boom. Yeah, so this is a combination of hasten the hour and I think my opponent stopped Fate's Judgment. And no, my opponent stopped Unerring Strike, and I got a Fate's Judgment off and Touch the Reaper, and was able to get the dogs down to 2, which unfortunately wasn't enough to take them down. So it was 3. I think I rolled low on the Touch of the Reaper. I didn't wound with one of them because I'm still only wounding on 3s due to the leadership bubble. And yeah, so now my opponent can just bring them back and heal them, which was bummer. So my opponent's turn 1. My opponent pushes up with this lone gassed unit, essentially giving me 10s, I believe, for my Myrmidons. And probably, I think here the flies can't even see this unit of ghasts, and he's staying back from the bloat flies here. But also, it's basically baiting me to charge this unit and just get countercharged by ghasts and vampire knights. He's moved his barrow knights in an interesting position here, which presents itself an opportunity that I will show you later. He also brings his knights around here looking to countercharge me. I could, in theory, also charge his vampire knights, but they're better in combat than barrow knights. So I have to make a decision on whether or not the hoarders, like if I want to charge, he's moved his shrieking horror right behind to support. I have to make a decision to go after the vampire knights or the barrow knights. Here's not a long charge, it's about a 5. Actually, you know what, now that I look at the yeah, so it's I have to make a decision there. And he also set up, if you notice, he set up so if I charge the bloat flies, like I'm probably not going to get through one round of ghasts, and then I get a counter charge in the flank with multiple units. And if I charge the dogs and try and kill them and overrun, then I get a counter charge probably from ghouls, noting that the ghasts may be able to charge out next turn anyway. Or I'd have to roll a high overrun to get out of this ghast unit's line of sight, because my base is so long, my unit's footprint is so long. So it's like setting up these traps for me. And essentially in the magic phase, my opponent is able to get back all the dire wolves. I let Pentagram of Pain grow. I stopped the bubble arise, but he's also able to get another arise, and with Gates of the Netherworld and Nosferatu, he can heal back all the wolves in one turn. So all of that magic damage was for naught. On to my turn 2. So, decisions have been made. Alright. So I see an opening. I charge the hoarders into the barrow knights. And I'm thinking I'm more likely to crumble the barrow knights because there's only 6. Well, yeah, I'm more likely to crumble barrow knights than I am vampire knights. And I see a moment where I maximize in a way where I can get this overrun into the Shrieking Horror with hoarders that do have mirrored scales, mind you, In the first round, it's probably not going to matter, but I'm hoping over time, if I can just stick that Shrieking Horror, maybe the Hoarders can deal with him? We'll see. They definitely need magic support. I'm testing this theory out today. It's like only a 5 or a 6, and it's super close because they don't. It looks like they might, but they don't actually hit the Vampire Knights. My opponent and I checked that when they overrun. They hit the Shrieking Horror instead. And then now I chaff all 3 units of ghasts here. Instead of charging the bloatflies, I fly out of line of sight of the ghast and trying to get in targets for countercharge. I set up my Myrmidons in a way where I can countercharge into the center if something gets stuck, because I know that this unit of ghast is probably going to come into this center Myrmidon unit and hold them up. And therefore I bring the Miser and the Courtesan together to get within 21, and the Miser only actually needs to be within 24 because it's a single model of the Shrieking Horror, but I also am within 18 of the Hoarders. And I chaff this unit of Knights with Furies just in case I don't actually get through. So if I do take counter charges, yeah, it's going to suck, but I'm at least mitigating 1 unit of Knights that maybe I can get with the Courtesan later on. So that's my thinking there. And then I do move 1 unit of Myrmidons within 6 inches of the center objective. So magic is a bit of a bust. At least my goal was to try and put some wounds on the Shrieking Horror before the Hoarders went in. And I was able to get a boosted Spectral Blades up on the Hoarders, which my opponent, he had to make a decision, and he decided to let that one go through. And so then I went for a Fate's Judgment, and I miss it because of the MR. And then I go for an Unerring Strike, not even the boosted, just a regular Unerring Strike, because again, I just want some wounds up. And I miss it because of the magic resistance. So I'm like, oh crap, this is a full wounded Shrieking Horror now. Oh man. But I do have rerolls to wound with lethal strike, so I do have that going for me if I can get this overrun, and I think I can get through this Barrow Knight unit. And of course, sure enough, you see exactly that onto the next picture right here, is that the Barrow Knights pop. They don't do anything back to me, and got it. I got the overrun. It actually wasn't that long. I think it was like a 5 or a 6, and so I get the overrun. I'm out of line of sight of the bats and the knights here, and I think his dragon can't even countercharge because there's not enough room for him to fit anywhere along my flank. So I'm hoping this is a good idea. I'm not sure, to be honest. I really don't know. Like, I think it really is sort of dependent upon whether I can spike on grinds, whether I can spike on Aegis saves, whether my opponent rolls 1s to hit himself. Yeah. And turn 2. So my opponent charges his ghasts into the Myrmidons and also tried for a charge into the Myrmidons with the Vampire Knights. They needed a 9, so it was a 50-50, and they fail it. So I breathe a bit of a sigh of relief there. And then this is actually a picture of all 3 ghast units killing the Furies, and all 3 of them rolled an 8-inch overrun, which is a bit strange. But everything else is how you can see it. He's giving me a flank here for the ghasts, and then prepping a counter charge with his ghouls on my flies. These ghasts are now the closest only possible charge for my Myrmidons here, so I'm going to have to charge them if I want to charge anything. And he backs up with his Vampire Knights, so he can see the flank of my hoarders for future turns. He brings the dragon over to try and also get into the flank and save his Shrieking Horror, or just, remove him from combat to crumble that really expensive hoarder unit. Skeletons now move up to contest the center, with his other skeletons following behind. And he's keeping a unit of wolves back just for later chaff. So, yes, with magic, my opponent was able to grow some skeletons, and I believe it didn't really matter if he got off Awaken the Beast, but I think he wanted +1 strength on his Shrieking Horror anyway, and so I decided to stop that, but he was able to grow back some skeletons this turn, I believe. Okay, so the vampire goes and swings and puts 3 wounds onto my champion. But he hits himself. Thank goodness. The Shrieking Horror, he hits and wounds himself, and it's Cleansing Fire, so it's a Flaming Divine attack, and so it goes right through his own save. And then the Shrieking Horror does 4 wounds and kills another base. I go to swing. Out of all my attacks, I think that's 19 attacks, I'm hitting on 4s. I hit 2 hits. So there's no point in having Spectral Blades at this rate. And I go to roll, and I don't get any 6s to wound, even with the reroll. And then I do my grinds, and I don't get any 6s. And I can reroll them, but they don't count as lethal strike because they're special attacks. And I don't get any 6s. So I have done 1 wound, and that's due to the vampire hitting himself. Even with hatred, which is the funniest part. So now I'm like, oh crap, this plan did not go well. Oh, wow. Okay. So let's see what I can do now. The hoarders, of course, lose their combat, but they're steadfast, and they do make their steadfast check. My turn. Okay, so now some things are developing here. Oh yes, and of course, the ghasts and the myrmidons we all stick around, and I reform into ranks. So from left to right, here's what you see. You see the bloatflies. I chose to charge into the direwolves, and my plan is to overrun. I have just enough space to overrun and hit this second ghast unit, and so I charge this myrmidon unit, and then my plan is to get rid of these 2 units in 1 round of combat, hopefully. And then I bring my Miser right in front of these 2 other units of gas, and basically saying, you can charge the Miser, but that's it. And this may be a mistake. The Miser may get stuck there for a while, but at least the dragon's in my front arc. Like, I can cast the snipe spells out of combat, or even though I'm in combat. So yeah. That's my plan. I'm trying to protect the flanks of the myrmidons. I'm almost kind of giving up on the hoarders at this rate. And I put the courtesan in a way where she's within 21 inches of this dragon. And the plan here is to just focus all of my range damage on his general, because the general does not have magic resistance. So that is the plan. I'm trying to get rid of this general. I do not care what happens in my combats right now. I just need to get rid of this dragon. And then I also move the Furies in a way so that the Knights can only charge the Furies and only come forward if they want to overrun, so they can't hit the flank of the Hoarders. But the dragon is number one priority. I also do this weird thing where I put the quarters in behind the wall, and for whatever reason thinking, oh yeah, it's going to make her distracting against the incoming night charge, and then realizing she's already distracting, so that was actually rather pointless. So, oops, moment there. But that is the plan. And so, the magic phase starts. It's a big phase. And I open with a Touch of the Reaper. And I get 2 wounds through on the dragon. My opponent makes 1 fortitude save. So the dragon now has 5 wounds. So, then I go for the boosted Unerring Strike. My opponent saves their dice to dispel it. And I outroll my opponent. I dice my opponent. Or not dice, excuse me. I actually had less dice because my opponent had 5 to spell and I used 4 to cast. And I rolled higher than my opponent, so my opponent got unlucky here. And to add salt to the wound, on my maximized hits, I rolled an 11. And then I roll 6 wounds onto the dragon, and then he makes 2 saves. So that puts the dragon down, or however many saves he made, the dragon has 2 wounds left. And so I roll for a boosted Fate's Judgment on the dragon, just hoping. I roll the dice. I get a 4. So my opponent needs to make 4 4-up armor saves. So 50, it's a odds are he should fail these 2. And boom! Oh my god, he failed the 2 armor saves. Oh. It was too much damage. Now, granted, I did get lucky. I will say that in terms of my opponent not stopping Unerring Strike, because that was the big moment. And it was Fate's Judgment that took out the dragon. Oh my goodness. So, Courtesan, thank you. But it's not over yet. Just because one of the dragons are down doesn't mean the other one is still operational. Isn't operational anymore. So we go on to close combat. And okay. So I get my overrun, and this unit crumbles. I'm able to do enough wounds, and I did need the bloat flies in here as well. So now they're strength 7, and I was able to crumble the second unit of ghasts, and I reformed them in a way so that they're going I had enough space to do this where they're going. Their front facing is now facing the ghouls and the ghasts, so they're basically covering the myrmidons at this rate. And on this side, the dragon hits himself again, so now he's down to 4 wounds. He kills my champion and kills another base. But we're still there. I'm still alive. I'm still there. So there's no more champion left. And this Shrieking Horror has 4 wounds left. I don't do anything back to him. So, oh god. In fact, I think this time I might have even failed my steadfast. But I know we still at least have 3 models, if not 4 left. And yes, this is the reform I was explaining earlier. I do take a wound for my trouble from the ghasts. And of course, this combat ends up being a continued sort of pillow fight. He does a few wounds to me, but I'm crumbling him. Actually, I actually crumbled him quite a bit. I started spiking on my to wounds roll, but this gas model is still around, and also takes a wound from crumble due to the general. And so now my opponent charges. My opponent charges the ghouls, needing a 6 on 2 dice to get into the bloat flies, and he fails it. Whew. So I got off a bit lucky there too. He charges the ghasts in, of course. So the gas go in alone, and then he charges both of his gas units into the miser, because why not? And then his knights come into the myrmidons. I did reform in a way. This is one of these reform moments where I'm just like looking at this being like, why did I do this? But I guess my thinking was trying to get more models in contact with the knights, which was just a bad decision because I had ranks. I had ranks, and it would have only left, I guess, maybe one or two of his knights in contact, maybe two knights in contact with me, and it would have left room for the courtesan. But this reform was a absolute mistake. I don't know what I'm thinking. Plus, now the issue is my opponent has 2 scoring units in the center, only to my 1. So, yeah. Not only that, so all of my opponent's magic is gone, aside from Awaken the Beasts. And my opponent forces through Awaken the Beasts on this unit of Vampire Knights. So now they're +1 resilience. I failed to dispel it. So I'm like, oh crap. I'm gonna lose this Myrmidon unit now. Uh-oh. Maybe. We'll see what happens. And I actually do pretty well. My opponent fails to kill the champion. And I put 1 wound on the champion. And I kill the remaining ghasts. So, yeah. And then in this ongoing endeavor, I finally get some wounds through. I think my opponent hit himself one more time and wounded himself. I think he might have done both of these wounds to himself. So the hoarders actually haven't been doing anything aside from the mirrored scales. This shrieking horde has slowly been dying, and so I'm looking at this and thinking, holy crap, I'm actually kind of winning this grind. Like, because I'm still steadfast. So I'm actually pretty happy about this because it means that the Shrieking Horde can't fly over and go after my greater demons, and now it can't heal itself either. So it only has 2 wounds remaining. So I'm feeling pretty good about this. And in other news, the knights overrun like so. They don't take any DTs, and both units of ghasts put all their attacks into the miser. They do a single wound, and I do I think I maybe do 2 wounds. I think this is probably after the crumble as well. I do a wound, and then crumble puts another wound onto this ghast unit. Okay, so my turn 4. I also did something at the end of my previous round of combat. I only had 2 models in base contact with this ghast unit. So what I did was I actually chose to reform the unit on the other side because these 2 models were not in contact with any enemy model. So I chose to reform them on the other side, keeping the same 2 models in base contact with the single model here, my single enemy model, which allowed for this opening here for the Myrmidons to come into the flank of the ghasts. And now I'm thinking, okay, I can crumble these 2 units to get the miser out of combat, and then overrun. I need a 9 on Swift Stride to get into this skeleton unit's flank, and then I actually have a chance of winning this objective. Yes, I do know this is risky. I could just reform them and take a charge from the ghouls, but ghouls win that if I take a charge from them. So I figured, well, if I'm going to take a charge from the ghouls, I might as well be attempting to contest the objective. If not, get points for all these units here. Because of my ridiculous reform that I did, I really don't know what I was thinking, but because of my ridiculous reform, I blocked my own charge from the courtesan of charging into these vampire knights, or charging here. So I couldn't charge with her. So instead, I just pulled her around and thought, well, I need her on this side now to countercharge the ghouls coming in case this whole thing goes horribly wrong. And as you can see, my opponent reformed on this side to get more models get more attacks, all of his attacks into contact with my models, but then I still don't have all of my models in contact with his. So this was well played by my opponent, I thought. and also keeps the courtesan in their front too. Um, but yeah, so okay, and the second unit of skeletons now is getting ready to. I think they're already almost in range for the objective. So now my opponent has 3 scoring units, uh, getting in range of the objective to my 2. So I'm still losing this. I'm starting to lose the objective here. With magic, I do get through both Stars Align and a boosted Spectral Blades on the Myrmidons here. I think my opponent stopped Whispers of the Veil, if I'm not mistaken, onto the Knight unit. Okay, so I miss my overrun. I get a 7, not a 9 on the Swift Stride, so the Myrmidons do not make it into the flank of the skeletons. Ooh, so now they are definitely taking a charge from the ghouls. But maybe the ghouls will fail it. They still need a 6, and they've failed a 6 before. But here I am able to crumble down the Vampire Knights. I do enough wounds to win the combat and crumble the unit here. So then I reform them in a way to keep both the knights, the second unit of knights, and the skeletons in their front. And look at that. So, my opponent doesn't roll any ones to wound themselves, but all of a sudden, this is after 4 rounds of combat, right? So that means each hoarder now has 4 grind attacks. So that's all of a sudden I spike on my grinds and I roll a whole bunch of 6s, and my opponent fails their saves. So, oh my goodness. The hoarders. Oh, thank you, hoarders. Oh my god. So I turn them around, and you can see an overview coming up. Okay. So I think I have this game won. However, I still need to be conscious of how many points I'm giving up. I still need to try and get this objective, because that 3-point swing is pretty. It's like that still makes a difference. Perhaps I could have played this differently, but these were the decisions I made. And I really wasn't sure if the hoarders were going to get through that shrieking horror. I really was not sure, but it like mirrored scales was just clutch. It came in clutch, and then the grinds at the very end did it. So the hoarders turned around. This is the reform you see with the Myrmidons. And I also reformed the bloatflies this way. I checked to see if I could go conga line with the bloatflies to try and block the ghouls from coming in. But my opponent and I both checked it, and the ghouls still had enough room to wheel around and hit the rear of my Myrmidons. So I figured, okay, well, then I'm just going to reform like so, and give them a front and give myself a countercharge option if the Myrmidons are even going to be around. We'll see. and the Myrmidon's stick. This is after combat. So I do kill one of the Vampire Knights, and I do kill a few skeletons. He kills a few of me, and with the static, I crumble, but also due to greater dominion, I crumble, I think, 1 or 2 less, depending on how many were dead at this time. But this is a picture of after crumble here. So we still have a few Myrmidons left in this unit, and I breathe another sigh of relief. I'm still going to probably lose this unit, but it saved the Miser from being pinned down and hopefully not ground out or through static combat res. And yes, so in other news, I also crumbled down to 6 models with the second Myrmidon unit. So at this rate, I'm saying let's go for it. Let's get this ghoul unit out. I charge the bloatflies into the rear. I charge the courtesan into the rear, and I charge the miser into the flank of the ghouls. I'm probably going to lose the Myrmidons, but I just need to do enough damage to this ghoul unit to just... I have 2 thunder stomps. I have the extra attacks from the courtesan. I have more stomps from the flies. So I think I get this unit now. And who knows? Maybe I can still contest the objective if this unit stays here. Yeah, so my opponent dispels Whispers of the Veil onto the ghouls, and I get Stars Align off on the miser, and I get Spectral Blades up on the courtesan to reroll her wounds. And this is a picture of the courtesan keeping the dogs in her front. The bloatflies overran, and they hit the flank of the skeletons here. I had 3 Myrmidons remaining, and the ghouls just completely pop. But then, as you can see here, my Myrmidons pop. So my opponent now reforms his skeletons to face this remaining unit of Myrmidons. The Vampire Knights reform to face the Miser and also potentially the Courtesan. And so my opponent at this point is handedly winning the objective and is now just going for points. But I think at this rate, my Myrmidons are in a way where the skeletons can't wheel past, and they can only hit the Myrmidons. So I think I'm happy about that at least. So turn 5 charges. Skeletons go into the skeletons go into the oh goodness. The skeletons go into the Myrmidons. The dogs charge the courtesan. And what happens here is when the dogs did, they had to maximize to this point, and then the courtesan actually has to maximize to them. So what this is actually leaving now is a potential flank charge on the courtesan with that overrun. Or actually, no, excuse me. I think with the skeletons, it might bring them into contact with the miser first. I couldn't quite remember. But yeah, this is not where the courtesan is. We have a base here to indicate where the courtesan actually is. And as you can see, my hoarders cleared up the chaff, not a problem. And so yeah, the Vampire Knights come to threaten. They fail their I think they fail their march check, actually. That's what it is. The Vampire Knights fail their march check. So they come, and they're going to take a charge, most likely from the miser at this rate. So miser, yeah, we'll see how that goes. So as you can see here, the dogs crumble down to 1 unit because of champion and max overkill. I reform my bloatflies to get more models in contact with the skeletons. And here I had also a decision. I did have a chance to go for a 10 charge into the rear of these skeletons and try and get their points. But I'd already lost the objective at this rate, so I figured I might as well go for something that's auto, and clear up this unit of skeletons. and then go for the Vampire Knights as well. So that's my thinking there, and then just put all of my magic buffs onto the Miser to try and see if I can tip that combat. And my opponent stops Stars Align, but I am able to get a boosted Spectral Blade up on the Miser. So, that being said, the Miser takes the Vampire Knights, and I crumble the skeletons. The skeletons here don't do anything, and they just hold on to the objective in the end. And so that is game. Whew. Very well played to my opponent. There's a few, I think him and I both made some mistakes that probably cost us some points, but I think ultimately, and we really weren't sure about the mirrored scale hoarders and the shrieking horror combat. So that was, or at least on my end, I know that was a good thing for me regardless, because it just pinned down that shrieking horror, even though it potentially could have given up their points. But the lucky thing was taking out that general, taking out the zombie dragon in one round of magic. That was, yeah. I'm happy I was able to put myself in the position to allow for a situation to get lucky. That was the thing that really just turned this game and tipped it. So the hoarders and the shrieking horror eventually the hoarders just outground the shrieking horror. So yeah, I'm happy about that result for sure. That being said, it's a 13-7. So I lost the objective. It was a 16-4, and that brought it back to a 13-7. So even though it looked like my opponent pretty much lost everything but a unit of skeletons, both my units of Myrmidons and the Furies were expensive enough to make it a 16-4, and that shows you how important, again, it's a nice reminder of how important the secondary objective is. Because even though it seems like a big loss with units on the table that are left, no. It's a smaller than expected loss here, but at the same time, I felt like I personally did a bit better than expected point-wise from my own personal perspective. So I feel that, I think from my perspective, going first really helped me just take some board control, because I just had it in my mind that I wasn't going to win the objective, so I might as well push forward and not let my opponent box me in or envelop me. I think perhaps, I liked my ruse with the courtesan, but I think at the same time, maybe it was just better anyway to just deploy her on the side of the hoarders. I don't know. I think because she's so fast, she has so much flexibility anyway, so I guess it didn't really matter, but that was a thought I had. I'm happy I was able to see the opportunity of the Baronites, trying to take advantage of opportunities and making them happen. I think it's nice to see growth in terms of playing this game, because sometimes you kind of wonder what could have been done to tip the scales, and I felt like I was able to capitalize on a few key moments there, and with a little bit of added luck there. I notice I'm still struggling to remember rules. For example, putting the courtesan, or just remember rules like unit rules, which affected, I guess, this overall macro idea. So it's keeping on track of the rules was tough because it affected the micro game. For example, how I moved that courtesan behind the fence was totally pointless. I really want to get better at reforming units. I felt like lately I've been reforming my units in a way to try to be cheeky, and in some cases it worked. So for example with the bloatflies, like cheeky in a way that allows me like to maximize potential points, or to maybe block my opponent from doing something, or allow me a charge path. But at the same time I'm also blocking myself, and I think it's almost like I'm thinking a bit too hard. So just getting better at like efficiently reforming units in a way that helps um, keep my units alive essentially, and prevent or create opportunities. I did feel like I used my chaff well, to the best of my ability here, being able to block up all those ghasts with one unit, which was really great. And then using the miser, I'm not sure if that was the right call, but it worked out for me in the end. But using the miser to block 2 units of ghasts, I was happy to do. And then, yeah, I mean, killing the dragon was, can't get around it. That was dice. But it really helped tip the scale in the game. But it was important. It was important to be like, okay, focus now on killing the dragon, and shifting that focus from the priority target of the Shrieking Horror to now a different target, which I think is pretty key. And then, yeah, I also missed that 9 overrun, which allowed again, it's a dice thing, but that allowed my opponent to pick up those extra points of the Myrmidons, and like secure the objective for them. So again, it's some of these micro things, and some of the things that happen with the dice, like it's a reminder as well to just like, don't give up, even though you might be losing your 2 big expensive characters. Like there's still opportunities to get points, and that was a learning experience for me as well. So that being said, there are 2 more games to go in this league, and currently I'm in 3rd place at the end of this round. But then once each player has had their final 2 games, then who knows? That we'll see. I believe my understanding is, from what I know of this league, the top 2 players from our league, League B, plays the top 2 of League A, and there's a bit of a playoffs that occur. So let's see if I can somehow squeak by. I need 2 big wins, though, I think. 2 big wins in my next 2 rounds if I can sneak into 2nd place. I don't think I can catch 1st place by the rate at both of these players, to be honest. Like, I have a feeling that they're probably going to run away with it, but you never know. I want to at least give it a try and get these 2 final wins. So that's where I stand currently, and yeah, we'll see how it keeps going. And that being said, thanks everyone for watching one more time. Please like and subscribe, and yeah, I just really appreciate y'all being here with me. So hope y'all enjoyed the video, and I'll catch you in the next one. Ciao ciao for now.